Hey guys, and welcome back to the FFP. It's time for part 2 of our week 3 start sit video. Of course, as always, we're going to be going through every single fantasy relevant player from every single game and giving you everything that you need to know to make the right start sits and hopefully come away with a win this week. Now, there's a few things to note, and one of them being you really have to contextualize this based off of your league. If you're in a super large 16-team or 18-team league, you have to understand that we're kind of basing this information off of a standard 12-team league. And so if you're in a larger league or a smaller league, that's going to influence some things. Try to contextualize it if you can. And there's always the comment section down below. Make sure to go down there, check out other people's comments, leave a question if you have one, and we'll do our best to answer it. I know we still got to go back and answer a few comments from the last video. Finally, there is a link in the description if you want to check out our website. That just there's an algorithm that does 1, rates players based off matchup, and 2, rates players based on their projected points. It's an algorithm that goes kind of dependent on the team they're playing and what they've done so far this year. It's not super accurate. It's not super amazing. I don't follow it like the Bible or anything like that. But, if you're not sure, it is nice to kind of look at that and give you a general idea. So anyways, that's what I got the breakdown. What do you want to say before we get started?
I'm not going to say a whole lot. One of the things we like to hear from you guys, comments, regarding your player choices. Like you said, there's so many things we can't factor in. Your bench size, waiver wire, etc. Love to hear comments. But the other thing I like to hear from you guys is this. We started this a couple years ago. Things were going well, getting a lot of momentum. Took a year off, and we talked about our strategical pause and why we did that. Now we're trying to get the momentum back. And so, that's not been easy, getting the momentum back. We'd love to hear what we like for our start sit video. Before we did one big video, do you want a smaller video? What about release time? Does it matter if we release in the morning, the afternoon, Tuesday, Wednesday? There's some things we want to hear from you guys so that we can get better at how we serve you. I think that's pretty much all I want to say right now.
All right, then let's get into our first game. All right, so let's get into our first game, and we got to talk about the Jets at Broncos matchup. Why don't we start off with the Broncos and Teddy Bridgewater? This is probably the best that he's looked in his career right now. He's averaging just under 300 passing yards a game. He's had 2 touchdowns in both of his games. He looks pretty good, and he goes up against a Jets team that is not great. Now, the Jets give up the 6th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, but they did that against Sam Darnold in his first, his Panthers debut, and then Mac Jones. So I don't think that they're really a particularly stout defense. All in all, Teddy Bridgewater for me comes in about that 10 to 14 range. If you're looking for an option, you can play him, but he's not going to be great. And as we talked about in our waiver wire video, there were some guys fairly highly available, like Derek Carr or Daniel Jones, who are probably better options that I might lean towards, but he's not unstartable by any means, especially if you're in a 2-quarterback league. Moving on to the running backs, what a confusing running back situation. All the reports, so we have Melvin Gordon has a great year last year, but then all the offseason reports are about how amazing Javonte Williams is. And then we come out week 1, Melvin Gordon is the 7th best running back in fantasy scoring. Well, meanwhile, Javonte Williams finished 49th. It seemed very clear by production and volume that Gordon was the guy. But then what happens? Well, they kind of go to almost a running back by committee, and Gordon finishes 32nd amongst running backs last week, while Williams finishes 35th. I think that was a bit of a hiccup. I think Gordon is going to bounce back. I think that's still his offense. I wouldn't start Williams, but Melvin Gordon, I think you can start as a low-end RB2 or flex play. My expectations aren't huge there, but he's been fairly productive, and the thing that he really does best is he is the pass-catching back, so he keeps himself out there on 3rd downs, and if they happen to be behind. So for me, you can start him. I'm just not huge on him. As far as the wide receivers go, you got to play Courtland Sutton. Man, he proved himself last week. He was real rusty coming off, recovering from that injury. First game back, didn't look so hot. But then Jerry Jeudy goes down and he capitalizes, 1, on getting some of that rust off, and then 2, the extra volume, finishes 12 targets, 9 catches, 159 yards. I would definitely play him. I would sit Tim Patrick. He scored in back-to-back weeks, but he's a guy who's really only going to get you 3 to 4 catches for 30 to 40 yards. You got to start Noah Fant, man. He is 5th in tight end scoring at this point. He's averaging 5 catches for 50 yards-ish. Not amazing, not lovely, but among tight ends, that's pretty good. I'd start Brandon McManus, and I'm going to start the Broncos defense. They were going against the Jets. They've given up 10 sacks, 5 turnovers, and 10 points per game. So good defense this week to play in that matchup. Flipping it over to the other side, Zach Wilson is a guy you very clearly have to sit. 4 interceptions last week, no thank you, right? He doesn't have a lot of weapons to work with, and considering that, let's look at some of his other weapons, because I think he's a pretty clear sit, right? Nothing really to add there. So moving on to the running backs, Ty Johnson, Michael Carter, Tevin Coleman, it is a running back by committee. And they didn't look horrible last week. Their yards per carry were a little bit up, but it's still a running back by committee in an offense where none of them are good pass catchers, and they're just not finding end zone touches.
Yeah, and do you wonder, like, the yards per carry was decent, but they were way behind playing terrible. So I'm sure the opposing defense was in pass coverage, right? So they probably didn't they probably in the nickel dime package. They probably had extra safety cornerbacks there. That's why I think sometimes those stats can be a little skewed. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
No, I completely agree with that. Furthermore, their top running back in fantasy scoring right now is Michael Carter. He is 45th in running back scoring. So, that's their best option. It's just, for me, I'm staying away from all of that. One guy I'm not staying away from, though, is Corey Davis. He finished 5th in week 1. And then he did bounce back last week and finish 88th amongst wide receivers. So he's all over the place.
Bounce back.
He bounced back to
What we expected he would on that team. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I think he is going to have a fair week this week. I think you can play him, and I'll tell you why. It's because he played the Patriots last week, and I don't know if I'm the only one who's noticed this, so maybe I'm making it up, but you ever find that the Patriots constantly shut down wide receiver ones, and it almost seems like the wide receiver 2 always does better? I don't know what that is. You go back many, many years, it just seems like every week that's happened. In fact, I remember last year and the year before, Cole Beasley had phenomenal games against the Patriots, even though he was the wide receiver 2. I think that has to do with a breakdown of coverage or whatever it may be. But I think that you can play Corey Davis as a wide receiver 3 based off of volume. Braxton Berrios had a good week last week. Went 11 for 7, 73 yards, ultimately finished 34th in wide receiver scoring. You can play him. I'm not big on him. I think he'll snap back to reality this next week. But I'd consider him maybe a really solid wide receiver 4. Where he's just kind of just outside of that bubble. And finish it real fast and real easy there. Ryan Griffin and Tyler Kroft, the tight ends. I'm going to sit both of them. I think you definitely got to sit their kicker, Matt Amendola, and their defense as well. I'm going to sit them too.
Yeah, I look at Teddy Bridgewater's having a good year there. In fact, the Broncos look pretty good right now, but they've had a very weak schedule and continue this week. I mean, they have the Giants, Jacksonville. Now they have the Jets. They'll be 3-0. But then after that, you'll see a real test of what you can expect, because after that, they've got Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Las Vegas, and then they've got the Browns. So for this week, I would trust Denver, but I think after that, we need to see what they really are about. So
yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. One of those things where we get really deceived by the first couple games of the season, and matchup really affects those. But yeah. Again, breaking it down, I don't know, that was kind of your thought for Denver. Anything to add there with the Jets?
I think that team for quite a while is going to be kind of ugly, honestly. I won't trust a whole lot there. I think it's going to be a mess, honestly. So to me, I just stay away from those guys whenever possible.
All right, let's move on to our next game.
So I got the Dolphins versus the Raiders. Let's talk about the quarterback. Start with Derek Carr. He came out of last week a little banged up. Weren't sure where he's going to be at, but as of Wednesday, the coach said he's good to go, no problems at all. Hearing that on a Wednesday, typically they'd wait till maybe Friday to make that announcement. Tells you he's good to go. Don't worry about it all. You can trust him. Now, the Dolphins' defense is a little underrated, but they're not nearly as good as the Steelers or Ravens' defense, and Derek Carr dissected those defenses. Now, Derek Carr's had stretches in the NFL where he's looked like he could be a top 5 quarterback. He's been great, but then he'll turn around and just disappear, and be very inconsistent. Now, I'm not going to call this guy a weekly stud, but I will say this. I think he's a bit underrated. I don't think those last 2 games are a fluke. Now, this week, I'd say he's a very solid start as a quarterback, maybe 12 to 14 range. If I would downgrade Derek Carr, the only reason why I would downgrade him is the fact that Tua is going to be out for the Dolphins. That Dolphins offense might struggle to move the ball, score points, decreasing how much he has to throw the ball there. Now, as far as the quarterback for the Dolphins, Tua's out. That leaves Brissett. Jacoby Brissett looked bad last week, but I think he will be better prepared. Now, the Raiders' defense is not nearly as good as the Bills' defense. I think we all know that. But it doesn't matter to me. I would still sit Jacoby Brissett. I won't trust him in this matchup for any reason. I don't know. I think I asked you before, but can you see a compelling reason why you'd even want to start him?
No, 0 points last week. That's really all you need to know. I mean, okay, so they get better this week and they put up 2 touchdowns. You feeling excited about that? I'm not.
No, not at all. Talk about running backs. Let's look at the running backs for the Raiders. You got Josh Jacobs, Kenyon Drake, Peyton Barber. Jacobs was he was sidelined at practice on Wednesday. He's questionable for this weekend. Now let's look at what that might be for the team. Let's look at Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake last week got started. He started 71% of snaps. He got 13 combined carries and targets. And then Peyton Barber got 29%. For some people, they don't want to see that sort of mix there. If your guy's going to roll the dice on Drake, you don't want to see Barber in there. But he had 13 carries for 32 yards. He didn't produce. Peyton Barber is what I call a pile pusher. 2-3 yards a carry, 4 yards a carry at the most. He's not that effective. In fact, he's got a career 3.5 yards per carry, and he's not good in the passing game. Drake wasn't good last game either. He didn't look that productive. But at times in his career, Kenyon Drake has been productive. And so here's what I do. If Jacob starts, sit Drake, obviously. Now, Drake has had 10 catches in 2 games and 105 receiving yards. And that's the strength of him. He's good in the passing game, good hands. In fact, a couple years ago, he actually finished according to Pro Football Focus as the #1 receiving back. So the guy can be effective in passing games. And Miami gives the 3rd most points to backs. Now, that was Singletary, Moss, and Harris. So they've given up a lot of points to backs, and I would say those backs are not what you call prolific backs. Would you agree with that?
No, I completely agree.
Okay, so I think he can have a decent game in this one. If you got to play Drake, once again, if Josh Jacobs sits, you could play Drake. Start him as a low-end running back 2 in PPR leagues. Let's look at Myles Gaskin. So he continues to lead the Miami committee. All 5 of his carries, 83% of his snaps were in the first half. Now, he didn't get a lot. He took a back seat in the second half to Ahmad and Malcolm Brown. And so, what's going on there? Why didn't Gaskin see more touches? Well, that one's pretty obvious.
You're not going to hurt your good running back in a game you can't win.
Yeah, they were blown out second half. That's why that happened. He is their lead back. You're going to trust him. He's going to get touches there. He'll see double-digit carries in this game, and it's going to not be nearly as lopsided as the Bills game in this one. He's a strong play in PPR leagues as a running back 2 or flex. In standards, he's an RB3. Okay, that's key. You definitely have to downgrade him in standard scoring systems. He's better to sit in those leagues. He's only had 6 career touchdowns. You know that in 3 years? So Gaskins and standards, I would sit, but you can play him in PPR leagues, and he'll be a fairly strong start. Let's look at the wide receivers. Let's talk about Jim Waddle, Devontae Parker, Will Fuller. I would sit all 3. 1, Brissett starting. We don't know target distribution between them with Fuller coming back. We don't know what that's going to look like. If you're desperate, if you had to pick a guy of the 3, I'd probably go with Waddle in that one. He holds the most talent and potential, so that's kind of where I would go with it. But I still think it's better to sit all 3 of those guys. Quarterback positions, question mark. You don't target distribution. You name it, I would sit them.
I completely agree with that. Waddle is the best wide receiver in that offense, and he looked phenomenal. When Tua was in, he had 6 catches?
49 yards in the first half. First week, he did good.
What did he do after that? Nothing. He was
Nothing, yeah.
done. So, you just see the difference in Tua. It's just avoid that situation right now.
I agree. Let's look at the wide receivers for the Raiders at this point. I almost said Oakland. It's really hard for me to get. Just like Washington, I want to say the Redskins.
I know.
I'm old school, but anyways.
Well, we're going to get canceled if you say that, too.
Oh, that's right. I can't say that. That's right. Sorry. Nobody's watching us to cancel us anyway.
Nobody's
I'm just kidding. Anyway, so let's talk about the wide receivers for the Raiders. We got Ruggs, Renfro, and Edwards. Ruggs has got the best pedigree of them, 3. Renfro's got the best resume, and Edwards has potential too. So let's look at Ruggs week 1. Only 2 catches. So he has a good week 2, week 1. He's not sure there. Here's what I would do with these guys. I would sit Edwards, just sit him. I think he's got potential, but he's not there yet. Renfro, you could start him in leagues that are 14 teams or more as a wide receiver 3 or flex play in PPR leagues only. Never start him in standard leagues. Ruggs carries a ton of upside, but he's not trustworthy at this point, even though I think he's a guy that could develop into a really, really good wide receiver. I would sit until we learn more, see clear usage. We need to see some rise in that. We need to see him get more targets to consistently trust him. Darren Waller, man, the dude's a stud, top 5 tight end. Start him every week. Don't even think about it. It's just a no-brainer. Mike Gesicki, man, I think he's going to benefit from Jacoby at quarterback there. I think typically Jacoby, if you go back to when he was at Indianapolis, he was generous in his targets to tight ends. I think you'll see that again. I think Mike Gesicki could probably get 8, 9 targets. And he's shown signs of greatness at times there. Other times, though, he disappears. He's very inconsistent. But yet the tight end position is very thin. So Mike Gesicki is a guy that you could start, but I put him in the 12 to 14 range, meaning that if you're in a 12-team league or under, you probably got better options. If you're in a large league, yes, you could start him. I would start Carlson. I would sit Sanders. Oakland's defense is improved, but they're not a great fantasy defense. They do have a great matchup this week, so they're a decent play if you have no other options. That's my thought there, and I would sit Miami's defense.
All right, great breakdown. Appreciate it. All right, so getting into it, we got the Seahawks and the Vikings. This is going to be a fantasy machine, this game. Honestly, 2 teams with phenomenal offenses and pretty much no defenses, it feels like. Breaking it down, how do you not start Russell Wilson? The Vikings have given up 6 TDs in 2 games, and let's be honest, they made Joe Burrow look like an all-pro quarterback, and that tells you really all that you need to know. Wilson's a must start, and so is Chris Carson. Carson is the lead back for sure. He is a touchdown machine. And when you look at it, the Vikings have stunk at their run defense. Chase Edmonds and Joe Mixon both ran solid over 5 yards per carry. Chris Carson is going to have a field day. He is a definite must start in this matchup. Looking at DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, there's another two guys. Like, how do you sit them? They're phenomenal. What is Lockett averaging, like 140, 150 receiving yards a game? And DK Metcalf certainly hasn't had quite as big of a role as Lockett, but he's still a guy who's going to get you 5-6 catches for like 70 plus yards. On a bad day, he's also a phenomenal wide receiver as far as like he just finds the end zone. He's a very big body, almost plays like a tight end in that sense you get in the red zone. So 2 must starts there. In fact, Vikings have given up 4 touchdowns to wide receivers already, and that trend's probably going to continue. I would sit both their tight ends, Gerald Everett and Will Disley. They're splitting roles, and none of them have really been all that impressive whatsoever. Of course, you got to start Jason Myers there, kicker up against the Vikings. Back-to-back kickers versus the Vikings have scored 10 or 11 plus fantasy points, so you definitely got to play him. And I'm going to sit Seattle's defense. Despite the struggles Minnesota's had, they've only given up the 6th fewest fantasy points to opposing defenses, so they just haven't been turning the ball over very much. Flipping sides there, and again, love how fantasy productive this game is going to be because it's a pretty easy breakdown for me, but take a look at the other side. I think you got to start Kirk Cousins. This is going to be a shootout, and we've seen that Seattle defense has absolutely struggled. Furthermore, Cousins is currently a top 10 quarterback in fantasy scoring, and again, this will be another game where they're going to be throwing the ball a lot. Even if he throws some interceptions, even if we miss the field goal at the end, there's going to be fantasy points there.
I believe somebody's going to disagree with me, but there's a potential that Kirk Cousins could finish as a top 5 quarterback. I know it's going to be a stretch. I'm not saying he's going to do it. I say there's a possibility. Now, that's because I think he's great. One, he's got great weapons, and that defense is brutal. He'll be a volume play all year long. Now, if you're in a league where they take away points for interceptions, that's concerning. But I like Kirk Cousins as a fantasy option the rest of the year, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. He's definitely a guy you should be putting on your roster because every single game for him is going to be 30, 300 plus yards, 2-3 TDs, really. You know what the one thing is that could limit this game's fantasy value? It's that both defenses suck against the run, and those offenses might just choose to run the ball a lot. We just talked about how Chris Carson's going to have a good day, but Dalvin Cook is definitely going to have a good day. Seattle gives up the most fantasy points to opposing running backs. In fact, they've given up 90 fantasy points in 2 games to opposing running backs. 90. That means they're giving up 45 fantasy points a game. That's insane. Plus, Cook is already phenomenal. He's currently 5th in running back scoring. Like, he doesn't even need that good of a matchup. He could have a phenomenal day. Of course, we look at the wide receivers. I'm going to say something crazy here. Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, and KJ Osborne are all guys you can start. Did you know that all 3 of them are top 27 in wide receiver scoring? Look at the guy who is, quote-unquote, the number 3 receiver there, KJ Osborne. Of the 2 games, his worst game was 6 targets, 5 catches. And then the other game, he had 76 yards and a touchdown or whatever. But you break it down, like, Osborne he's looking really good, and they need him to. It's going to be, again, another shootout. So do you disagree with me on that? I know that
I agree with you, yeah.
It makes me nervous to say you can start all 3 guys, but I really think you can.
Yeah, I think you can too.
Moving on, I would sit the tight end Tyler Conklin. Looked like he might be good week 1, had 4 catches. Just had 2 last week for me. He's just not getting enough done. I'm also going to start Greg Joseph. And I can't believe I'm saying that because he just missed that field goal and he didn't look good. But he's made 3 50-plus yard field goals in 2 games. The fact of the matter is, other than that one kick, he's a good kicker and they're giving him opportunities. Now, if you're nervous, because I get it, you see that big miss and you think maybe the offense is going to move away from relying on him to kick field goals, you know what? It's not a big deal. We just talked in our waiver wire video that there were 4 great free agent options for you to pick up. So go ahead and grab one of those guys and watch that video if you want to replace him. But I think you can play him. And finally, I think you should sit the Vikings defense. That's a no-brainer against Seattle. They are firing on all cylinders and they are looking great. But that's my breakdown. As always, Rob, I want to pass that to you for anything you want to add to it.
That sounds good.
All right.
So I've got the Buccaneers versus the Rams. I want it to be a fun game to watch. Hopefully I can get some time on my schedule there to sit down and enjoy this one. I love to start with the quarterbacks. I'll start with Tom Brady, the ageless one. 9 touchdown passes in 2 games, over 600 passing yards. But that was against Dallas and Atlanta, and those defenses are not good. This is his first real test. Yeah. The Rams are a good defense. Antonio Brown, by the way, is on COVID protocol, so you have to watch and see. He does have the vaccination, so that means that he still could make it and clear in time for this weekend, but that'll hurt if he's out. Mm-hmm. Look at the Rams. They shut down Wentz and then Dalton and Fields. But that doesn't say a whole lot, especially if you look at Chicago. Chicago is not a very good offense at this point. Yeah. But last year, they were the number 1 defense in the NFL, so that's not a fluke. This defense is the real deal. They're very good. Yeah. But you look at Tom Brady's weapons are still great. And then you look at Gronkowski. Gronkowski looks like the old Gronk. In fact, just quickly on you were huge on this dude all offseason, right?
I was huge on this dude. In fact, I drafted him super late, and now he's got what? If you include the Super Bowl, 3 straight games with 2 touchdowns. You can't argue with that. That's for sure. And sorry, that's a little distracting, but I'm gonna go for it anyways. I was just talking to somebody about trade targets, and somebody said, "I want to sell high on Gronk," and it's like, I just can't get rid of him. He's so good. He might not continue 2 touchdowns per game, but honestly, he's going to be a top 3, top 4 tight end.
Well, I'm all for sell high, buy low. But in his case, if you have started tight end, who's going to come into that position?
Who are you going to, yeah.
Like, you're not getting Kittle, those other top tight ends, so you're going to roll the dice on another guy? That's a mistake at the tight end position.
Yeah.
So, anyway, you look at that. He's got great weapons there. Tom Brady, Gronk's playing well. You got to start the greatest quarterback of all time. Yes, I said it. If you think otherwise, you're an idiot. We love you, but this guy is phenomenal. You got to love Tom Brady. But I would say this: temper your expectations. He's been averaging 4.5 touchdown passes per game. Not this week. You can expect maybe 275 passing yards and 2 to 3 touchdowns with maybe an interception, which is a quality day, decent day, not great, but you got to play him.
Well, I love how people are with Tom Brady. It happens every year. He's going to have one bad game. He does have one bad game every year. And everyone's going to panic. He's old. He can't play anymore. It's going to be hilarious.
He's
I can't
washed
wait.
up, yeah. So, it started him. Matthew Stafford. With him and McVay together, that's a great partnership. And the Bucs defense is not looking nearly as daunting as they were at the end of 2020. Stafford's going to need to throw to keep pace with Tom Brady in that offense. And the Rams' running game is not nearly as good with the injuries that they're having right now, And so I would start Matthew. I would start him as a top 12 quarterback. I wouldn't say he's definitely not in the top 6 or 7, but definitely kind of around that 10 to 12 range. Let's look at the running backs, Fournette and Jones. Jones is actually the better running back. I believe that with all my heart. The unfortunate thing was, and the coach confirmed it, he's not good in pass protection. He's missing things. Last week he forgot to pick up a guy. That's key. You're going to protect Tom Brady, and if your running back can't pick up guys in pass protection, that's an issue. Mm-hmm. And so to add up and get consistent carries, that's not going to happen. So I would sit Jones. I would say, Leonard Fournette, you could start him. Mm-hmm. I would start him in very large PPR leagues, and that would be leagues 12 teams or more. That's kind of where I would play him in that one. Let's look at the running backs for the Rams. You got Henderson or Sony Michel. Now, Coach McVay came out and said Darrell Henderson dealing with a rib cartilage issue there. It's really about pain management, and they have hope and optimism that he'll be able to play and be ready for this game. Now, he came out today with a flak vest on. He played limited in practice and left practice early. Not a good sign, I don't think. It doesn't bode well for him. If Henderson plays, this to me is a scary situation. One, he's dealing with a rib injury. He's one hit away from aggravating it. Yeah. And teams are going to take shots. He's going to take a pound in that area. Now, he is having a good year. He gets goal line carries. He's productive in the passing game. If he starts, he could play. But for me, you'd have to put him down to a very, very low-end running back, too, due to the injury. Once again, all it takes is one carry, one hit, boom, he's back out. So if you could avoid him, I think it's best to avoid him. It's probably better if he sits and you can just trust Sony Michel if he sits. But Sony Michel can only be played in standard leagues because Sony Michel is not very good in the passing game. If you know anything about it, that's kind of where he's at. So that's what I would do with him. Any thoughts on the running back situation there?
Yeah, it's only week 3. Like, you want them to sit Darrell Henderson because you don't want this injury 8 weeks from now.
No, you don't. So I agree. So the wide receivers, you got Brown, Evans, and Godwin. Wide receivers there for Tampa Bay. Who gets Jalen Ramsey? I don't know. I assume it's going to be Evans. But I know they'll move Ramsey around there. They like to move him around in the coverage, so we'll see who he gets. But I think those wide receivers in this matchup, it is a more difficult one for them, but they're still what I call wide receiver 2s. And you're going to have rush and roulette with these guys. Week 1, everybody's like, look at Evans. He's going to have a bad year. Game 2, he comes out, boom, has a huge game 2 touchdowns. And that's the way it's going to be. Tom Brady's going to find the open guy. He's not going to press it. He's not going to force things into coverage. Mm-hmm. When it's all said and done, though, all 3 of those guys are going to have good numbers this year. So every week you got to consider them as a wide receiver 2. Unfortunately, until one of them gets injured, you can't really trust any of those guys as a wide receiver 1. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
No, I completely agree. And hey, on the bright side, you can say I don't want to start them because they might have a bad game. They're all also so talented that when they have a good game, sometimes they single-handedly win you your week.
Yeah,
it's happened. So that is something to consider. But you're absolutely right. It's kind of annoying.
It is, yeah. So wide receivers for the Rams, look at Kupp and Woods. Kupp, man, we love this guy the moment he came in the NFL. Like, we had a mad crush on this dude.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why he hasn't finished in the top 10 yearly as a wide receiver is, 1, injuries and Jared Goff. But with Stafford as his quarterback, I think he's got an opportunity to be a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy scoring.
I believe right now he's number 1.
Yeah, I believe he is. So you need to start him as a strong wide receiver 1 in this game. I think he's a very good play. Woods has been quiet so far. Robert Woods has been, but he's a clear number 2 in that offense there. They're going to need to score points. He'll see double-digit targets in this game. He'll see a spike in his production. start as a strong wide receiver 3 or flex in this game. As far as Deshaun Jackson, I think he's going to have his best game as a Rams with the Rams in this one. I think he's going to have a very good game there, but his usage doesn't dictate that you play him. You still need to sit him. Same with Van Jefferson. I would sit both of those guys. Gronkowski, he's back. Right, like we just talked about it. It feels like this guy's been in the league forever, but he's still only 32 years old. That's how. Yeah, only 32 years old. What?
You're old when only 32 is a phrase. But
Smack you, young man. So, he's still got a couple years, a little gas in the tank, right? And somebody looked at last year. Like last year, he didn't look like Gronk. He just didn't. I think, you take a year away from football. It takes a year to get back, get to shape, get to speed. They lost the offseason due to COVID. Gronkowski's back.
This might be the healthiest he's ever been.
Yeah, so I love this guy. Tyler Higbee had a good week 1, disappointed week 2. He'll have better volume in this one there. One Henderson's hurt, and then the Bucs need to score points. So I'd start him in this game. I think Tyler Higbee will be a decent play. He'll be a top 12 tight end play for you. I would start Suckup and Gay. Now, when it looks at the defenses, the conventional wisdom would be you sit both defenses because these quarterbacks and these offenses are very good. But here's the thing. They'll probably give up points, but these defenses also can produce pressure and turnovers. Do you remember back when the Chiefs played the Rams and the final score was 54-51? I mean, like 54-51, that's a huge score. Did you know in that game, they combined for 8 sacks, 3 interceptions, 4 fumble recoveries, and 3 defensive touchdowns? And I think you could see a similar play in this one where the defenses give up a lot of points, but create some turnovers, some sacks, things like that. So they're not strong plays in this game, but if you don't have anything else, they're not bad streaming options simply because the defense have potential to put pressure on the quarterback. But that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Well, that's a great point to put out there. I don't think a lot of times people forget to consider that, but it will be a fun matchup. I guess here's a question. Okay, which one of those defense you prefer?
If I had to go with one, I'd have to say the Rams because I just simply think the Rams are a little bit better defense overall.
Yeah, all right. Well, and one more thing maybe to add to that, and I guess one more thought real quick. With Darrell Henderson and his injury going on, that's, again, you're already in a matchup where they're going to need to score points. Those wide receivers and their tight end, they're all probably going to have a good week. And so I know sometimes you think, I hate to start 2 receivers on the same team, especially when they've got a tight end, but that really feeds into, they're probably going to be relying on their passing game a lot this game. All right, now let's break down the Packers versus 49ers. Let's go with the Packers first. Man, they have been just, I guess the only phrase would be to use is bipolar. They were horrible week 1, and then they looked phenomenal week 2. What are we really going to see from the Packers? Well, one, we're probably going to see something a little bit in between. They still have some issues, right? They lack depth in their receiving game, right? You've got Devontae Adams. After that, Tanyan is an okay tight end, but they really don't have a strong wide receiver 2. I'll talk about that a little bit later.
I disagree. I think their strong wide receiver 2 is Aaron Jones.
Aaron Jones, the 3 touchdown running back. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. But I think that you can play Aaron Rodgers, and here's why. He's not going to get 4 touchdowns like he got last week. But he is going against the 49ers, who've given up the 5th most fantasy points to QBs, and that's the 5th most to Jared Goff and Jalen Hurts. That's not Pat Mahomes or Josh Allen or Tom Brady. So clearly their defense has struggled.
I love how people overreact. Week 1, they're like, oh my God, what's happening to Aaron Rodgers? He's done. He's terrible. And we advised starting him going into the weekend. Sure enough, did you really think Aaron Rodgers was done? This guy is so competitive. He's so talented. You may not like him as a person, but as a quarterback, it's hard to ignore this guy. Yeah, he had a bad week 1, but we saw vintage Aaron Rodgers last week.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to Aaron Jones. How do you not start this guy? 4 touchdowns last week. 6 catches for 48 yards. I love that you said, he was not only their second best receiver, he was also a better receiver than he was a runner. He only had 3.9 yards per carry, but he did have 17 carries, and ultimately I think that feeds into it a lot.
We had a guy in a dynasty league that we play in, right, heading into late Sunday night. He was number 1. He had total points the highest for the week, right? And that was before he had Aaron Jones. So, that guy had a monster week. Just push him over the top. But anyways.
Who played against him? That was this unfortunate week.
So that was Tommy. If you're watching this video, Tommy.
All right, moving on to the wide receivers. Devontae Adams, 13 catches in 2 games. That's 110 catch pace for the season. How do you not play this guy? That's a no-brainer. Not even going to bother. You have to sit all their other wide receivers, though. Let's take a look at this. Their second wide receiver for targets was Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who finished with 4 targets and 0 catches. Probably a bad sign. Their next best receiver statistically was 2 catches for 26 yards in Randall Cobb. If you had to start one of their guys, that's the guy. But for me, that's a hard pass. I'm only playing Devontae Adams. You can play Robert Tonyan. He did bounce back last week for 50, I think it was like 52 yards and a touchdown, but he only had 3 targets and 3 catches. They just didn't, for whatever reason, and that's what's confusing, you desperately need a wide receiver 2 there, and you don't use your tight end. That, for me, really makes me wonder, like, is this going to last the whole season? Where he's just not a big volume guy. And last year he was touchdown dependent. We kind of warned against that, and a lot of fantasy science warned against that. And sure enough, taking a bit of a step back this year, but he's still probably going to finish as a top 12 tight end. And if you have him, probably start him unless you have another option. As far as the kicker goes, I'm going to sit Mason Crosby, and I'm going to sit the Packers defense. Now we can take a look at the other side of the football and the 49ers. Jimmy Garoppolo versus the Packers, for me, that is a guy to sit. I'm going to sit Jimmy Garoppolo, but I'll tell you what, it's a great matchup. The Packers give up the 5th most fantasy points to QBs. They've given up 7 touchdowns in 2 games, and they've even allowed an average of more than 40 rushing yards to QBs. But the fact of the matter is Garoppolo just hasn't been all that productive, and it's a competitive position. I've said it every start-sit video, and I will continue to say it. It only needs to be 12 starters, and when you can grab Daniel Jones or Derek Carr off the waiver, no, you should not be starting Jimmy Garoppolo.
Kirk Cousins, another one that's widely available out there.
Yeah. So moving on, though, what about the running backs? Now, they are an absolute mess in their backfield. Raheem Mostert and JaMychal Hasty are both out this week. Then you look at Trey Sermon. He is questionable. He played 3% of snaps last week before getting a concussion in the 4th quarter. So one, he wasn't highly used, but then he got a concussion in the 4th quarter. Now he's questionable for this week. I imagine he's likely going to play, but again, even if he does, he's going to have to do a lot better than 3% of the snaps for him to have value. So who's their guy there? Well, obviously it's Eli Mitchell. Oh wait, Eli Mitchell missed practice today, Thursday the 23rd, with a shoulder injury. So he's banged up. Granted, I imagine he will start. He will be the lead back. He is going to probably see 20 touches. After all, he saw 19 last week. He's the clear RB1. But temper your expectations. He is banged up.
I said in one of the comment sections there, how long, if 49ers are really looking to contend this year, they need to trade for a reliable veteran running back at this point. They're going to need to do that. There's only so many guys you can sign out there. There was even talk of them looking at Frank Gore. Honestly, that tells you a little something. He's like 68 years old right now, but they've got to bring a guy in. They're just getting hammered in injuries there. But
they got 4 running backs hurt. Their top cornerback got hurt. All the injuries last year, did they build on a burial ground or something? Like their stadium? There's just, it's crazy. But we move on to the wide receivers now. That's the situation. I should clarify, I do think you should play Eli Mitchell if he is in the game, which I think he will be. Moving on to the wideouts, Deebo Samuel. Man, what a surprise this year. Currently 3rd in wide receiver scoring. He has 282 yards in 2 games. Of course, he won't keep that pace up, but I wanted to have a little fun. So here's what we'll look at. He's on pace for 170 targets, 2,400 yards, and 127 catches. That's not going to continue, but he did it back-to-back games. You have to wonder, he's starting to look like a legitimate wide receiver. Like it could be a wide receiver 1.
Yeah, they drafted Brandon Ayuk, and they had some other guys there. And I think we forgot last year because he had an off year, but his rookie year he came out, the guy was phenomenal. And he reminded me an awful lot of Anquin Bolden, how he played and what he did. The guy's a beast, and we're seeing it again. He's a real deal.
Well, he's a beast as far as his yards after catch, his efficiency. He struggled his year 2, but he was injured. Of course he struggled. And that really hurts, especially when you have those lower body injuries, because you struggle to cut and get open. But you also have upper body injuries, and you struggle to catch and make that separation. So, he was banged up. I wouldn't really consider last year. I think he is, for me, I'd consider him a solid wide receiver, too.
Well, you miss practice, then you miss that time with the quarterback, and your timing issues are off. Everything's interconnected. But
yeah, absolutely. Breaking down all the other wide receivers, Brandon Ayuk, Sanu, Jennings, and Sherfield, I'm going to sit all of them. The biggest of those names is Brandon Ayuk, but really, he's been a major disappointment this year, and I don't know what it comes down to, but I'm at least going to need a couple prove-it games before I feel comfortable putting him in my lineup. As far as the tight end goes, George Kittle, here's a big thing. Start him. He's been a bit of a disappointment this year, but you still got to play him. He's still been a guy who's going to finish as a top 12 fantasy tight end, and he hasn't found the end zone yet. You have to remember that we're just 2 games into the season statistically so far. We're heading into week 3. You know what that means? It means 1 touchdown drastically skews things. And the fact that he hasn't scored a touchdown has hurt him. But here's a crazy concept. It's going to happen. It's not like he's going to go the whole year without scoring. He's going to be fine. And I think as they continue to work out that offense, he'll score more points. Furthermore, for fantasy, that defense has struggled, so he should see some more volume. keeping this thing moving, I'm going to finish up real quick. I'm going to sit Robbie Gould, and you got to sit the 49ers defense this week. 49ers defense has actually been fairly good for fantasy. They're going against the Packers. For me, that's a no. I'm going to bench them.
So the final game I've got is the Eagles versus the Cowboys. Talk about Dak Prescott. Huge week 1. He laid an egg week 2. What do you figure with that? How do you deal? Well, they won the game, so that's weird. But when they're facing the Eagles, going up the 8th fewest points to quarterback. So while he's facing the Eagles defense, it looks good. But one that's against Garoppolo and Matt Ryan, so it doesn't say a whole lot. He has excellent weapons there, and he's a must start. Don't worry about last week. You need to play him. Jalen Hurts. We'll talk about Jalen Hurts a little bit. I did pick him up in a dynasty league there. Not nearly as effective in week 2 that he was as week 1. But here's the thing with him. He reminds me a lot of Lamar Jackson. No matter how ineffective he might be passing the ball, his legs, his ability to run the ball, always make him almost matchup proof. He's got 144 rushing yards in 2 games, so I like Jalen Hurts in this one. I think you need to play him. Let's look at Ezekiel Elliott in the ones. Let's look at the running backs. We said last year and last week that when it comes down to Ezekiel Elliott and Pollard looks like the better, more explosive running back, meaning that his role will continue to increase while Zeke's will decrease. With that said, he's still Ezekiel Elliott. He's still a very good running back. Here's what I would say with Ezekiel Elliott. I think right now, because of what's happening, I'm trying to figure out what that role is going to be, and the fact that Pollard looks good. And it's not that Elliott's not playing well. It's just that Pollard's playing
really well.
Really, really well. So he's worked himself into that role there. Elliott's not currently the running back 1 that he was before, but he's definitely a very strong running back 2 with huge upside. You got to play him. As far as Tony Pollard goes, will he become the next Kareem Hunt? That running back 2, that's the backup that you can start weekly, and he's a strong play. I think he can be. I think he will be. But I think I'd like to see one more week before I exactly know what his touches are going to be. So if you can afford to sit Tony Pollard, I would do that. If you have to play him, start him in large leagues as a flex play.
Yeah,
easy for me to say there.
I completely agree. I imagine this will be a good week for him, and I think he will be the next Kareem Hunt. And I'll tell you why. Just based off of what the Cowboys are doing, I think they want to. I think they saw kind of what happened week 1 versus the Bucs, and you maybe want to see, hey, maybe they want to slow down the pace of the game a bit. That's just my opinion, my breakdown. I don't know.
Well, they also have some injuries too at wide receiver, so that's going to help his production also. So, talking about Miles Sanders, he's a strong running back. I would consider him like a borderline running back 1-2 in this game. Cowboys linebackers can be exposed in coverage. I think that plays well into Miles Sanders' strengths. I think he's very good in the passing game. I think he'll get a lot of targets out there. I would play him. Let's look at the wide receiver, CD Lamb. He's now the team's number 1 wide receiver. He's a stud. Okay, and that on top of it, what secures him as the number 1 guy, why he can be a stud, CD Lamb, is that Gallup is on IR and Cooper's got banged up ribs, and so he's hurt. So that just solidifies his role as the number 1 guy there. I know you kind of love CD Lamb going into this.
I do. He's going to see huge volume. He's going to have a great year. Hopefully that doesn't mean he'll see extra attention from defenses, but he probably will. That being said, he's going to be great. Huge fan of this guy. Ever since we saw this preseason, he just, at a practice, just broke free from Jalen Ramsey on a couple of plays. It was like, yeah, he's looking sharp.
You know, it was weird for me because when they drafted him, they had Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup, who were good wide receivers. They didn't need a wide receiver. They drafted him. Very reminiscent of the Vikings back when they had Chris Carter and a guy named Jake Reed. Oh, by the way, if you don't know, it's Jake Reed had come off 3 years in a row of 1,000 yards, and they drafted a guy named Randy Moss. And we're like, we didn't need a wide receiver. I'm glad they did that, and I think that they're glad they drafted CD Lamb in this one. So start CD Lamb as the number 1 guy. He's a stud. Look at Amari Cooper. Now with Michael Gallup on the IR, he would be a very strong start as a wide receiver too, but unfortunately he's got rib injuries, and so he's limited. They're not sure if he'll be available, if he'll play. I think he's going to play, but that means because of the injuries, instead of being a strong wide receiver 2 play, I think he moves to a wide receiver 3 at this point, just because the injuries there. Let's look at the wide receivers for Philadelphia. I think there's a lot of value here long term. I think there's a lot of potential here. Smith, Reagor, and Watkins, and they're playing Dallas, giving up the 5th most points to wide receivers. But here's the thing. You look at target distribution, production is not consistent between the 3 guys. Add to that a young quarterback that's going to have bouts of inconsistency. So I think at this point it's hard to trust any one of those guys. They all carry a risk. If you had to start one, I would sit them all, but if you had to start one, it'd have to be Smith.
Yeah.
He's their best option out there. In deep leagues, he could be started as a wide receiver 3. As far as tight ends go, sit Dallas tight ends, whether it be Jarwin or Schultz, I would sit both of them. And Dallas Goedert, I think he's going to rebound back this week. I think he's going to have a decent week. He's going to fall into about that 10 to 12 range there. And they got torched by Gronk when they did this. Mm-hmm. I would start Zerline and Elliott, and I would sit both defenses in this game. Once again, love you guys. Please leave a comment. That's where it can really hammer down on some of these issues, like who you have, who's on your bench, what do we think you should do, and here's why we think you should start a guy or sit him.
Yeah, that being said, I'm going to we're going to end this video now, but I'm going to go do some editing for this one, and hopefully you'll get to some of those comments that we haven't answered. But so, I'll be honest, it's just been fun getting back to more football. Last year, unfortunately, didn't do the videos, and kind of miss doing the comments. It's fun. I do enjoy it. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. You have a great day, and God bless.